Information flow is vital when complex systems fail. Newly released documents reveal how information was fumbled from the top down following the worst oil spill in history. In our third story in the countdown, in the weeks after the Deepwater Horizon explosion, any decent estimate of the amount of oil spewing into the Gulf of Mexico was non-existent. BP claimed not to care, supposedly exerting its energies into plugging the well, while in the White House, officials seemed indifferent to releasing an accurate figure. And so they settled on a placeholder estimate of 5,000 barrels per day. Now, emails released by the watchdog group Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility today reveal efforts by the White House to downplay the scope of the spill. The explosion in the spring of 2010 on board the BP-leased rig left 11 men dead and released 4.9 million barrels of crude oil into the Gulf of Mexico before it was capped 3 months later. Marcia McNutt, director of the U.S. Geological Survey and head of the government's Flow Rate Technical Group, recounted frustrations felt between scientists trying to estimate the flow of oil and the White House trying to do damage control. Quote, "I cannot tell you what a nightmare the past 2 days have been dealing with the communications people at the White House, DOI, and the NIC, who seem incapable of understanding the concept of a lower bound. The press release that went out on our results was misleading and was not reviewed by a scientist for accuracy." Officials cited the scientists' lower estimate of oil split per day, 25,000 barrels, as the maximum amount gushing from the Deepwater Horizon. When one person with the White House Communications Department suggested, how about saying that several lines of evidence suggest that the flow is 12,000 to 19,000 barrels per day, but that the rate could be as high as 25,000 barrels per day. McNutt, in an email explaining the situation to her colleagues, insisted that the bottom line could not be simplified because the 25,000 is a lower bound, not an upper bound. Let's bring in Kate Shepard, reporter with Mother Jones Magazine and a Countdown contributor. And Kate, thanks for your time tonight.
Thanks for having us.
The Obama administration repeated BP's own faulty estimate that 5,000 barrels of oil a day were leaking into the Gulf for the first few weeks of April before they officially released their own estimate of 25,000 barrels per day in May. Ultimately, the figure turned out to be more than double. Why is this story important now?
Well, this has always been a really important figure to pin down because the amount of money that BP will be fined in the end is completely contingent upon this figure. The fines range from $1,000 to $4,000 per barrel, so that barrel per day figure is absolutely crucial to determining just how much oil is spilled into the Gulf and how much BP will have to pay up.
This group, PEER, they have also filed a complaint against Dr. Bill Lehr, a scientist for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. He led the Plume analysis team. What are the arguments being lodged against Dr. Lehr?
So PEER, which represents watchdogs within the government, has basically aired concerns that they say come from the scientists who are on the team who indicate that Lehr may have downplayed the size of the spill and gone with some lower figures in this report than what they were finding in their own studies. And so PEER is accusing him of being the one who wrote those lower figures into the report and then filed a complaint today to that effect.
Has there been any fallout for members of the White House communications team who were involved in this? Has anybody lost their job? And if not, why not?
Not that I know of to date, and this isn't the first time that complaints have been directed at the White House communications shop with regard to the oil spill and these estimates. At the time of the spill, people were saying that these figures were pretty low. Several months later, when there were additional reports put out, the White House was again accused of being overly optimistic about how much oil was gone. And even the Oil Spill Commission, which the president appointed to look into the spill, dinged the White House for basically screwing up the communications on this and creating a lot more public confusion and distrust than they needed to. The
response to the Deepwater Horizon spill on behalf of the White House and other agencies was so ineffective. Do you think anyone has learned a lesson here?
You know, it is not entirely clear to me that anyone has. And if anything, looking back now, almost 2 years from the spill, it seems like everyone's forgotten about it and just kind of hopes it will go away. And it's still not even clear just how much BP will ever be held accountable for what happened in the Gulf. And the pressure on them to pay up just seems like it's not anywhere near what it was a year and a half ago.
But as far as the ongoing lawsuit and the efforts to try to reach some sort of settlement, are there more documents that are still to come out related to that?
Well, Peer is currently involved. They've filed a Freedom of Information request with various government agencies related to this question of how big the spill was and what the government agencies knew and when they knew it. And so we're looking, I'm expecting that more documents will come out of that FOIA request. They've actually filed a subsequent lawsuit in order to make sure that they get those documents. And so that's something to keep an eye out for going forward.
And then, Kate, back to the White House just for a final question here, and that is, you mentioned that the White House communications shop has been criticized before. Back then or even today, as these new reports come out, what is the White House response? Do they just ignore and not return reporters' phone calls on this?
Well, the response currently is that because this is involved in an ongoing lawsuit, they can't really comment, which is understandable. But in general, it seems like they haven't really acknowledged a lot of these complaints publicly, at least.
Kate Shepard. Kate with Mother Jones Magazine. Kate, thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.